As a child, sitting on his grandfather's knee, Scott Mitchin would hear stories of lumberjacks and the wild timber towns of America's northeast. 100 years ago, in those parts, there were great stands of valuable maple, birch, oak and enormous pines. And Scott's grandfather would tell how these giants were felled, then floated to sawmills, with thousands becoming waterlogged and sinking along the way. Scott Mitchin thought nothing of it for years, until by accident he came across these logs on a dive one day and saw his future. Hidden beneath the Great Lakes of North America is a treasure as valuable as gold and silver. Old trees that were mere seedlings when Columbus sailed to these shores are now lying on the bottom, perfectly preserved.
This is a mill 100 years ago, and the dock came out here, and this is just thousands and thousands of logs that just sank right here. Big logs. Big logs. We'll try to bring some up. Oak, maple, birch, hemlock, pine, elm, and a few other surprises.
Scott Mitchin has been a treasure hunter for most of his life, but this time he discovered his treasure almost by accident.
I was searching for shipwrecks and they were getting in my way. I literally got snagged up on a bunch of them, and this was 15 to 20 years ago, and I always thought in the back of my mind that they could be utilized, but I wasn't looking for wood at that time. It wasn't until several years later when every day I was reading something about the lumber industry in turmoil, whether it was the white-spotted owl or the don't deplete our rainforest. With 5% of the virgin forest left only in the United States, I thought this would be a perfect time to bring up that otherwise wasted resource that the lumberjacks from 100 years ago left behind.
At the turn of the century, there were 10,000 lumberjacks working in these hills around Ashland, Wisconsin. They cut down millions of trees to build great cities like Chicago and to literally fuel America's industrial revolution. But some of these trees had taken centuries to grow, and pretty soon most of the old-growth forest of North America had been clear-felled and floated off to the sawmills around Lake Superior. The lumberjacks worked for $1 a day, and boy, did they work. Despite the harsh conditions, they cut all year round, softwoods and hardwoods, but many of them went straight to the bottom. Caught up in massive log jams, the big ones got wetter and wetter until they were simply too heavy to float.
Thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands went to the bottom. You know, when you're talking each mill cutting up millions of board feet per year, their annual yield, 10 to 20% going to the bottom. You're talking a whole lake bed of wood.
So even when they knew the logs were going to the bottom, they just kept rafting the hardwoods?
Oh yes, but it was an inexhaustible resource, they thought back then. We'll go cut a few more out of the woods and worry about a few that go to the bottom every year.
So, 3 years ago, Scott Mitchin began to salvage the lost forest of North America. How did you bring up the very first log?
The very first log we brought up with an inner tube. I stacked 500 logs by myself with inner tubes. Going in, taking the inner tube down with an extra tank, hooking the inner tubes onto the log, filling them up.
Scott's treasure hunt is a bit easier now that he's refined the process. He hammers a spike into each log, then attaches an airbag. With the turn of a valve, compressed air raises the log from where it's lain for a century. A lot of people thought Scott was mad when he started salvaging these logs. After so long at the bottom, they had to be rotten. But remarkably, most of them are in great condition. Why are the logs so well preserved after so long under the water?
Well, it's the low oxygen content in Lake Superior, the icy cold waters. It's a perfect uniform condition to preserve these logs.
It's soaked to the core, but after it's been oven dried, this will be some of the most valuable timber on earth, almost priceless. You just won't find hardwoods like this anymore, because these took hundreds of years to grow in the shade of the old-growth forest.
This is going to be an oldie.
It's easy to prove how old these logs are. You count the growth rings, one for every year.
As it got bigger, she started growing slower and slower and slower. And for a good 100 years probably here, it grew consistent, the same size year after year. But then after that, you're going on, over 200 years old, it starts really slowing down. In the last 40 years, you've got an inch here. So for the last 40 years of this tree, she grew extra slow.
The tree was probably 525 years old, and you talk about another 125 sitting on the bottom.
So the whole log would be worth thousands and thousands of dollars.
A tree or a log like this is definitely going to fetch thousands.
Every time you open up one of these logs, there's a wonderful surprise. It's the kind of timber that inspires craftsmen to create.
There it is.
There it is.
Right there.
Yeah, the treasure chest opens up.
You're looking for the white instead of the green streaks.
Marc Price is going to use this richly figured maple to make guitars.
I'm going to cut each piece, shape each piece, sand each piece, finish each piece. This is going to be an entire process. It's going to be done by hand. This is too incredible to take this, and each one's going to be just spectacular.
Just been notified today that they need 2 right away for the Eagles to use and be the first of the 2 of a series of 1,000. So we're real excited about the instrument market in general.
After all of their songs about lost love, you can bet the Eagles will come up with at least one good tune about the lost forest. But if your taste is more classical, you might like a violin made from that ancient wood. In the backwoods of Wisconsin, John Wan's workshop is full of beautiful dreams, some finished, some still taking shape in the wood.
If I hold it exactly on the node, it rings. If I move my finger so that it's a little off of the harmonic node, it's dissonant.
John can turn any bit of wood into music, but when we brought him a piece of maple from the lost forest, he said this wood deserved the hands of a master, and he would make me a beautiful violin.
You know, this is really nice wood. It's fancy. You could make a violin as good as Stradivarius out of this.
Well, there are thousands of logs at the bottom of that lake, some of them with timbers, the types of trees that just don't grow anymore.
Well, bring me some more of this wood, will you? A little bit. I would like to make a couple of fiddles out of it.
And you feel you've got a couple of masterpieces in those hands?
Yes.
Salvaging what's left of America's old forest is not the end of this story. Scott Mitchin is now negotiating the rights to sunken logs in Canada and rainforests submerged in the dams of Brazil. Scott is finding a kind of treasure most people have simply forgotten about. And to him, it's a reminder of just how fast the world's great forests are disappearing.
as time goes on and you see less and less of the virgin forest and you see less and less of the woods in general, we feel good about every tree that we bring up as possibly saving 2 or 3 from being cut down. And you know, in this age of recycling, we've got to turn our energies, look forward, look for ways to utilize these otherwise wasted resources. You know, this is not a renewable one. When this is gone, it's gone. We want to make it last.